Good morning. It's December 17th, and today we're in the book of Nahum. And it's interesting, this is another book written to the Ninevites, the same ones that Jonah was sent to as an ambassador, probably in the generation just before the events and the proclamations of this book. And so I've often been asked the question, if the Ninevites repented, why does God promise judgment to them? But we've seen that repentance is often temporary. It was certainly that way for the Israelites themselves as they came up out of the wilderness and wandering around there. They dedicated themselves to following after Joshua. But the generation that came up after him seems to have forgotten all about that, and they start to descend into chaos and certainly into idolatry and all those things too. So it doesn't take long. Sometimes a generation, often much less than that. I can think of even times in my own life, as I'm sure that you can, where even hour to hour, there might be a sense of repentance and then falling back into sin and then repentance again. So certainly it isn't always a long lasting repentance that happens. And so when we come to the book of Nahum, I think it is about a generation or so after what happened in the book of Jonah. And actually, I think Jonah would have been elated to hear this message to the Ninevites. This is what he wanted for them. He wanted them to be judged and for God to vent his wrath on them. And so that's what God says is coming. Very beginning of the book here, it says a prophecy concerning Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. The Lord is a jealous and avenging God. The Lord takes vengeance and is filled with wrath. The Lord takes vengeance on his foes and vents his wrath against his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger, but great in power. The Lord will not leave unpunished. And so as we read this, I think this is something certainly that Jonah would have been happy to hear, that they're finally going to get what is coming to them, what he felt like they deserved. And this is also reassuring for the Israelites. And we've talked about this before, but one of the purposes that God gives for telling the nations around Israel about his coming judgment is that Israel then will feel free not to have to take judgment or vengeance themselves. If God is ultimately in charge of justice, then we don't have to take it into our own hands. We can trust him with that. They are eventually going to get what they deserve, and God knows better than we do what they deserve. And so that's one of the reassuring things, I think, for these books of the prophecies, especially the minor prophets, is that they reassure Israel that God sees what has happened to them, the victims that they have been at the hands of their neighbors, and that he has taken accounts of that and will eventually do his avenging for that. And so that brings them confidence and assurance that they don't have to take that for themselves. And so that's what's happening in the book of Nahum. It's too bad that the repentance of the Ninevites didn't last longer than that. So I'm sure there were still some within Nineveh and within Assyria who knew the Lord and followed after him in the generations after. But the bulk of the people had turned, and therefore wrath and judgment was coming. And that's the bad news of the book of Nahum for the Ninevites.